Imagine this. Jesus and his disciples walking down the street today. Could be any street, but let's just pick my own. They're strolling down tree-lined 93rd Street, past the modern skinny homes next to the 1930s bungalows. A cat walks along a fence and they stop to pet it. At the end of the street there's a playground. A handful of kids are running around playing tag, while parents flank them on the benches, mostly looking at their phones. As the disciples pause at the playground, one of them points to a particularly large child, leans over to Jesus and asks, "Rabbi, who sinned, this child or his parents, that he is born so fat?" Fat. Huh. Did that word sting? Did it make you flinch? If so, you understand instinctually the moral judgment our society places around weight. It's the same moral judgment placed on the man born blind in our reading from John 9. Who sinned? The disciples asked. The man or his parents? Who is to blame? Back in their day, physical ailments like blindness would be attributed to some fault or sin of the person afflicted. It's an unfair and unjust attitude. But it's not so foreign. We often do the same thing today with cancer or mental health or issues like a person's weight. In fact, I believe there's nowhere that we get more judgmental than body fat percentage. Our culture assigns moral value to the numbers on our scales. It doesn't matter what type of body you were born into, or what health challenges you faced, or what medication you're on, or the life circumstances that surround you. You point and say, fat. Of course, we don't actually say that out loud, not in Canada, unless we're by ourselves, looking in the mirror. As judgmental as our society is, we don't need that peanut gallery. The voices of criticism inside our own minds is loud enough. And those inner voices berate even those of us who are fit, bodybuilders included. We all look at ourselves with such loathing, not just concerned about health, but angry with the moral fiber of who we are. There's something wrong with me because I ate too much. I am too lazy. I'm not strong enough. Imagine saying those ridiculous things because you have asthma, or when your hair started going gray, or you were born blind. We don't blame ourselves for those issues, but weight is always viewed as something within our control, and therefore something that's our fault, even when it's not. It colors every thought we have about ourselves and every interaction we have with the healthcare system, with this tint of guilt. If you can relate to that, you understand a part of how the blind man and his parents view themselves. They blame themselves for his blindness, just as the disciples assume that someone along the line must have sinned to cause his ailment. Now, that doesn't need to make sense to us. It is as illogical as weighing your moral value on a bathroom scale. They would have looked at our attitudes around body weight as ridiculous, quite rightly so. Jesus responds to the disciples in the same way that he responded to Nicodemus and the woman at the well, in metaphor. Jesus in John's Gospel is always talking in metaphors. This is not just about blindness. It is about a world born in darkness. It is about Christ entering as light into that world. He brings sight to the blind man, and Christ helps us all to see God's light. Metaphors. Weight in our society is never just about you and I individually. It too is seen as a metaphor. In cultures where food is more scarce, having a few extra pounds is viewed as a status symbol. Even into the 20th century, there were popular fat men's clubs that men could compete to join. To be fat was seen as a sign of being good-humored and kind. However, today, we view fat through the lens of overconsumption and waste. We have a wider societal issue of excess and unbridled greed that has led to the rise of global temperatures, the destruction of nature, exploitation of poorer countries. Now, you're not thinking about all of that when you look in the mirror, but our attitudes towards excess weight are shaped by it. This attitude is made really clear in the movie WALL-E, a future world where humans have become blobs of fat served by robots. Fat is used as a metaphor to sum up all of our societal ills. So let's pretend we're back at that playground with Jesus and his disciples. The rude disciple has just pointed out that poor kid. Jesus picks up the opportunity of this metaphor to say, no one sinned. This is no one's fault. But for a world that is trapped by sedentary office jobs and fast food chains, a world where we drive through nature, a world stuffed by empty calories of vapid entertainment, a new hope has come. The promise of true health and true rest. If I really wanted to overstretch the analogy, maybe Jesus would conclude with, I am the Ozempic of the world. In our gospel reading, Jesus approaches the blind man, spits in the ground, spreads mud over that man's eyes, telling him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The blind man goes, washes, and is healed. And then begins the interrogation. The religious leaders want explanations. Who did this? How? The man barely knows. A man named Jesus put mud in my eyes, he says. They question his parents. They question him again. Eventually, they drive him out. Later, Jesus meets up with this man and reveals who he is, saying, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Jesus is still speaking in metaphor. This whole event has been metaphor. Jesus wasn't a divine optometrist healing every blind person. He healed this specific blind person to illustrate a greater truth. That metaphor, however, isn't as effective today because we don't view eyesight as a moral failing. So let's return to the image of being fat. Let me affirm first that being fat is not a moral failing. I'll repeat that those negative voices in your head are wrong. But since society already uses weight as a metaphor, since you already feel that judgment and self-criticism, imagine Christ came, spat in the mud, rolled it into a little pill, and invited you to swallow it. As gross as that is, you do it. And then in that moment, suddenly you are the perfect weight. You weigh just what you ever dreamed of weighing. The extra rolls disappear and you have to snatch at your pants before they fall to your ankles. What would you do? How would you feel? If weight impacted your mobility, maybe you'd run. Imagine running down the street, running up and down all the stairs, running like that child in the playground. If weight impacted your self-image, maybe you'd rush to the mirror and check yourself out. You'd suddenly take all the pictures you can. And if weight is on your mind every time you eat, maybe now you can enjoy a bite of food, whatever it is you wanted, without feeling like someone else was watching. Imagine the freedom that brings. I believe the point of Jesus' metaphor is the feeling of freedom, of liberty, of having your chains broken. The blind man is given his sight, and not only can he run free, but now he is free of all the judgments and limitations that society was putting on him. Free from the pointing fingers of the disciples asking who sinned. Extending that metaphor to weight, the promise of Christ is that with him, you run free. Free from your own limitations, but also free from the limitations and judgment society is putting on you. The point isn't actually about losing weight, just as it wasn't about gaining literal eyesight. It's about finding freedom and wholeness in the God who created you. It's about shrugging off the negative opinions of the world, about rejecting a society that tries to put you in a box, about realizing that in God, you are loved and redeemed and made whole. I tell you that the freedom you imagine having if you were given the divine Ozempic is available to you now. The joy, the release, the sense of rest is available to us now. This isn't about physical change, remember. I'm not a televangelist promising to heal your ailments. But spiritually, when we turn to Christ, when we focus on Him, we find a freedom that comes from eschewing societal expectations. We care what God thinks, and we toss away what the girls in the locker room said. We care how God views us. We ignore the comments on the internet. We value God's judgment, and we stop judging ourselves. If you and I lived a life where we only cared about God's opinion, if we really did that, oh, the joy we'd have. It would radiate. Others might even try to put it down, just like the religious leaders did to the blind man. But such freedom is impossible to contain. So back to Jesus in the playground. His point to the disciples is that there is nothing here to judge or criticize about that child. There is no sin, except maybe the sin of a society that points fingers and interrogates the health status of others. The tragedy in the story was never the blindness. The tragedy was the way that people looked at the blind man and decided that they already knew his story. But Christ refuses that way of seeing. Instead, he meets the man, restores him, and sends him walking freely into the world. And that's what Christ does for us as well. He meets us in the middle of all those accusing voices, our culture's voices, other people's voices, even the harsh voice inside our own heads. And he silenced them with something stronger. The simple truth that we belong to God. When we know that, when we really know that, the scales of judgment fall away. The endless measuring stops. The shame loses its grip. And we suddenly discover that the freedom we were longing for was never about changing our body or fixing our lives perfectly. It was about learning to live as someone who is already loved. Then we stop asking who sinned and start seeing people the way Christ sees them, as beloved children of God. Amen.